Hello, I'm back and I am going to read about chapter 3 from King George V. So, this was a really good chapter, and I just wanted to let you guys know that um, if you're interested in reading it, I found it to be a very fascinating chapter. I found this book on thriftbooks.com, so I don't know if you can find it at a library or anywhere else. Any book on King George V, it's very fascinating. So this chapter 3, is entitled Heir to the Throne. So I'll get started. It's kind of a long chapter, so I probably will break this up into 2 parts for better listening. And if my tone is a little too slow, then you can go up into the right-hand corner of the listening feature on listening speed and adjust it. And you can adjust it to 1.0, which is at right now, or you can adjust it to 1.5 or 1. You can even adjust it in between to 1.1. So I was listening to some today, and you can just take the bar across and just listen, adjust to your appropriate listening speed. And you can do that on anybody's channel. And then I'm just going to click on a picture of King George, because I really think I found him to be very fascinating. Because a lot of people nowadays, they'll read about King George VI and they know about Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. But when you go back into George V's reign and some of the difficulties he had then, he had to fight the war. I mean, he didn't have to fight the war, but he reigned as a serving monarch of the people during World War I, and some of the issues there, and the Irish independence, and in India was still under the realm. They were not a commonwealth then, they were an empire. So, but there were elements of brewing independence occurring in Ireland and India. So this is where the Commonwealth tours that they do now are so important, because they're still brewing independence in Scotland, and not so much in India because they're independent, but in other countries are wanting their independence. And Australia is a big one. If they lose Australia, that's why Australia is so important, and Canada are so important for them to keep in the Commonwealth. So I'll go ahead and get started. As the year 1900 drew to a close, the Duke of York prepared for a long abstinence from stamps and shotguns. Accompanied by his wife, he was to represent the Queen at the opening of the first Parliament of the Commonwealth of Australia. He resented any interruption to his busy, undemanding routine, yet he never failed to answer the call of duty. Earlier that year, when required to be in Berlin for the Crown Prince's coming of age, he had written, "I hate going, of course, but I'm always ready to do what the Queen wishes, or anything that may in any way benefit my country." On being asked to undertake his mission to Melbourne, he even enlisted the Prime Minister's help in extending the journey. "Please ask the Queen whether we can visit Canada on our way home from Australia. She is averse to it owing to our long absence from England, but we think it would cause great disappointment and perhaps jealousy. Use your influence." Okay, I'm a bit hot. I'm in Texas, so it's a bit hot. I thought I'd have my air conditioning on. So, Lord Salisbury did persuade the Queen to extend her grandson's itinerary, but on the 22nd of January 1901, she died. The Duke reflected what lay in the hearts of almost all her subjects, wrote in his diary, "Our beloved Queen and Grandmama, one of the greatest women that ever lived, passed peacefully away in her sleep." Although present at her deathbed, he was mortified not to be able to attend her funeral. Having been struck down a few days earlier by the German measles, it was not illness, however, which threatened the cancellation of his tour little more than a month before the proposed date of departure. The newly proclaimed king, King Edward VII, declared that he and Queen Alexandra could not bear to be separated from their only surviving son for the best part of the year. The government recognized both the strength of family unity that had prompted the king's protest and the burden of ceremonial duties that would fall on him in his son's absence. The cabinet nevertheless decided that for political reasons, the visit to Australia must continue. Arthur Balfour, soon to succeed his uncle as prime minister, was deputed to explain to his sovereign the realities of modern imperialism. The king is no longer merely a king of Great Britain and Ireland and a few dependencies whose whole value consisted in ministering to the wealth and security of Great Britain and Ireland. He is now the greatest constitutional bond uniting together in a single empire communities of free men separated by half the circumference of the globe. All the patriotic sentiment which makes sure the empire centers in him or centers chiefly in him, and everything which emphasizes his personality to our kinsmen across the seas must be a gain to the monarchy and the empire. Now the present opportunity of furthering the policy thus suggested is unique. It can, in the nature of things, never be repeated. So, a great commonwealth is to be brought into existence after infinite trouble, with the fairest prospects of success. Its citizens know little and care little for the British ministries and British party politics, but they know and they care for the empire of which they are members of and for the sovereign who rules it. Surely it is the highest interest of the state that he should visually and, so to speak, corporally associate his family with the final act which brings the new community into being, so that in the eyes of all who see the chief actor in the ceremony, its central figure should be the king's heir, and that in the history of this great event, the monarchy of Britain and the Commonwealth of Australia should be inseparably united. Overwhelmed, but not entirely convinced by Balfour's eloquence, the king withdrew his objections to the tour. He caused surprise, however, by not immediately conferring on his son and heir the traditional title of Prince of Wales. Well, that is quite interesting. I have to shut my iPad off. Okay. That's interesting. I forgot about that. He didn't immediately confer the title of Prince of Wales. It was the Duke of Cornwall and York that Prince George embarked for Australia in March 1901. The Dukedom of Cornwall, which is a comfortable income for the duchy properties, is the prerequisite of the sovereign's eldest son, inherited by him either at birth or on the sovereign's accession to the throne. The more ancient and familiar title of Prince of Wales requires to be specifically conferred. That actually makes sense now when you remember Charles getting his coronation. He immediately made the announcement of William being announced officially the Prince of Wales. Now, William did not want to have an fancy investiture. He didn't want to spend that kind of money. And William is not into those ceremonial robes. He'll do them when necessary, but he's not into the spending and the ceremony. You know, we all know he's a very private person, but he does do his duty when he needs to. So, okay. In withholding it until November 1901, the king was thought to have behaved with an uncharacteristic lack of generosity to a model son now in his 36th year. The probable explanation of the delay is that the king and queen wished to avoid confusion in the minds of their subjects. The king had been Prince of Wales for 60 years, the wife of the Prince of Wales for nearly 40 years. By customizing the public to their own regal styles before the advent of a new Prince and Princess of Wales, they hoped to retain the separate identities of each generation. Well, I think that makes sense then, because your identity is wrapped up in the Prince and Princess of Wales. As we know, Camilla didn't take on the title of Princess of Wales, even though technically she was. But that identity was so wrapped up with Princess Diana, even though she was divorced from Charles. So they waited a long time, until Charles ascended the throne, and then Catherine then became the Prince of Wales. So that makes sense. It's a better, more positive, connection. Of the king's affection for Prince George, there can be no doubt. I have always tried to look upon you far more as a brother than a son, he told him in August 1900, though I have never had the occasion to blame you for any want of filial duty. The Duke of Cornwall more than reciprocated such loving sentiments. From Gibraltar, the first port of call on the voyage to Australia, he told his parents how distressing it found their last farewells of Portsmouth. May I come down to our cabin, he wrote, and had a good cry and try to comfort each other. The affecting scene took place on board the Opier, an Orient Line steamship of 6,900 tons chartered by the Admiralty. Her cruise was in its way no less rigorous than that of the Bacchant 20 years earlier. It is true that in 1901 the royal passengers traveled in luxury, that their shipmate Canon Dalton found fewer opportunities for imparting knowledge in his role as the domestic chaplain. But the Duke, who preferred statistics to picturesque description, noted that he and his wife were separated from home and children for 231 days, and that during those 8 months they covered 45,000 miles. They laid 21 foundation stones. They received 554 addresses. They presented 4,329 medals. They reviewed 62,000 troops, and they shook hands with 24,855 people. People at official receptions alone. He wrote to Queen Alexandra from New Zealand. It is all very well for you and Papa to say we mustn't do too much, but it is impossible to help it, and you just can't help it. Our stay in each place is so short that everything has to be crammed into it. Otherwise, people would be offended, and our great object is to please as many people as possible. The grueling program set the pattern for all future royal tours of the Empire and the Commonwealth. The monarchy was becoming not only peripatetic in habit, but mercantile in mind. On the 1st of November 1901, the travelers returned to England amid many congratulations. The Duke, who was created Prince of Wales on his father's 60th birthday 8 days later, accepted an invitation in the following month to address the City of London at Guildhall. He concealed his speech with a twofold call to the nation. I appeal to my fellow countrymen at home to prove the strength of the attachment of the motherland to her children by sending to them her best, to distinguish representatives of the commercial interest of the empire who I have the pleasure of meeting here today. I venture to allude to the impression which seemed generally to prevail among their brethren across the seas, that the old country must wake up if he intends to maintain her old position of preeminence in her colonial trade against foreign competitors. In striking that mercantile note, he showed more awareness of Great Britain's economic needs than did his father. The king had earlier that year told the Duke of some unsolicited advice from the Lord Charles Beresford. The pith of this letter was that you should associate yourself in each place you visit with trade and commerce, exclamation point, by personal interviews with chambers of commerce. Although the king added that the subject was doubtless a most important one with regard to the mother country, our colonies, and India, the exclamation mark is no tribute to his vision. Within a half a century, the pursuit of trade had become an essential and often paramount factor in all royal tours overseas. Wake up, England, the label which the press affixed to the Duke's Guildhall speech exaggerated both his devotion to travel and his relish for the role of ambassador. He had done his duty and more. His true feelings, however, were revealed in a letter to Queen Alexandra from Canada. Of course, our tour is most interesting, but it is very tiring, and there is no place like dear old England for me. A few years later, when seemingly punitive taxes imposed by Liberal government were causing apprehension among landowners, Lord Esher made a bold suggestion to the recently crowned King George V. In view of impossible fiscal and social legislation in the future based upon principles even more hostile to holders of real or personal property in Great Britain, it is worthy of careful examination whether prudence does not require that any savings effected by your Majesty or the trustee of the Duke of Cornwall might not be invested in real estate in the Dominion of Canada. Apart from the financial advantage of such a policy, which might possibly be very great hereafter, there are other considerations, popular and political, that might commend it to your Majesty. King George rejected the advice of his father's confidant, and when in 1925 his own eldest son bought a ranch in Canada, he thought it was a mistake. The success of the first tour strengthened the confidence of the Duke and Duchess alike. Warmed by the nation's approval, the Duke felt he was able to express to his wife a sense of gratitude by which shyness had often kept locked in his heart. He wrote to her soon after their return. Somehow I can't tell you, so I take the first opportunity of writing to say how deeply I am indebted to you, darling, for the splendid way in which you supported and helped me during our long tour. It was you who made it a success. If you had not come with me, it would not have been at all a success. Although I have often told it to you before, I repeat it once more, that I love you, darling child, with my whole heart and soul, and thank God every day that I have such a wife as you, who is such a great help and support to me. I believe I believe you love me too. The Duke delighted to share his pride with others. The Reverend W. A. Spooner, warden of New College, Oxford, met him at a dinner in Lincoln's Inn in April 1904. Referring to him by his old style of Duke of York, the warden afterwards wrote, "He was very easy to get on with and told me a good deal about his colonial tour. I liked the way in which he kept the Duchess to the front and made me understand that she was associated in everything with him. It gave me a pleasant impression of a thoroughly happy and virtuous life." Throughout the long cruise of Ophir, the Duke of Cornwall was not alone in pining for England. "It is exactly 20 weeks since we came on board this ship," a fellow passenger noted. "Please God, in 13 weeks more we shall be at home again." The writer was Sir Anthony Bigge, whom the king had recently appointed to his son's private secretary. More courtiers of the Victorian age came of aristocratic family. Grey and Ponsonby, Phipps and Knowles. Bigge was the son of the Northumbrian parson. As a young officer in the Royal Artillery, he formed a close friendship with the Prince Imperial son of the deposed Emperor Napoleon III, who, after joining the British Army, had been posted to Bigge's battery. Although in hospital with fever when the prince was ambushed and killed during the Zulu War of 1879, Bigge was later chosen to accompany the Empress Eugenie to the scene of the tragedy. That in turn brought him to the notice of Queen Victoria, who in 1880 appointed him to be an assistant private secretary. On the death of Sir Ponsonby in 1895, Bigge succeeded to his post, displaying tact, wisdom, and ingenuity during the last, increasingly difficult years of the Queen's reign. On her death in 1901, he might reasonably have expected to become private secretary to the new sovereign. King Edward, however, wished to retain Sir Francis Knowles, his private secretary for the past 30 years. Bigge was instead offered the post of private secretary to the Duke of Cornwall, who is the heir to the throne and stood in need of an experienced counselor. In a strictly hierarchical sense, his appointment was a demotion. That, however, was, as it turned out, he remained with his new master until his own death in 1931, serving him successfully as Duke of Cornwall, Prince of Wales, and King. Although Bigge's judgment during the constitutional crisis of 1910 to 1911 may be questioned, his contributions to the strength and stability of the monarchy during those 30 years can be scarcely exaggerated. Bigge's tribute to Ponsonby defines his own ideal of a private secretary. The longer I live and the more I look back, the more remarkable man he seems to be. One of, if not the greatest gentleman I have ever known, the entire effacement of self, the absolute non-existent of conceit, side, or pose, the charming courtesy to strangers, old, young, high, low, rich, or poor, his extraordinary wit and sense of ridiculousness, his enormous powers of work, too much. It killed him, but I never heard him say he was hard worked or had too much to do, nor did I ever hear him say, "Oh, don't bother. Come back in 5 minutes. I am writing an important letter to the Queen or Prime Minister or the Archbishop of Canterbury or Carl Manning, Miss Langtry, etc." The letter was put down, and he listened patiently, and he considered what the crown equerry or the equerry in waiting should ride in on the right of the Queen, or whether next Sunday's preacher should refer to this or that. Bigge served the Queen, and from 1901 her grandson, with the same selfless fidelity. Certain habits acquired during those Victorian years persisted to the end of his long life. One was to conduct an immense official correspondence almost entirely by hand, sometimes making his own copies of letters for future reference. The Queen not only preferred to transact business in writing rather than in conversation, even with ministers staying under her own roof. She also frowned on modern aids of communication, the typewriter, introduced into government offices in the late 1880s, prompted Lord Rosebery, Foreign Secretary in Mr. Gladstone's last cabinet of 1892 to 1994, to address this appeal to Ponsonby. The Queen dislikes our typewriting. We warm with typewriters here in every embassy, legation, and consulate, or most of them. These ingenious machines are paralyzed by the Queen's displeasure. We have consequently set ourselves to mend our ways, and I now send you for submission to Her Majesty a specimen which, to my admiring eye, is rather the print of a family Bible than the faint scratch of the typewriter. Will she deign to smile on it, or so liberate a fetid industry? Rosebery's plea was rejected. By the Queen's command, ministers and officials continued to submit all business in manuscript. The first typewritten letter to emerge from the private secretary's office is dated 30 June 1897, but the use of the typewriter was a practice of which Bigg took little advantage, and the Queen none at all. The royal holographic tradition died hard, even on official topics. King Edward VII was almost as prodigious a correspondent as his mother, nor did he grudge the labor of making copies of his own letters. His son, as Prince of Wales, was equally assiduous, in spite of writing with exceptional slowness. He told Bigg on the 2nd of January, 1908, "What a blessing for you to have received no letters on Christmas and New Year. For me, it is an awful time. I have written nearly 40 in the last week, and have not finished them yet." On succeeding to the throne in 1910, he instructed Lord Hastings, the Viceroy of India, to write to him in his own hand. 8 years later, however, Bigg, by now Lord Stamfordham, told the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, "The King appreciates your adhering to the good old custom of writing to the sovereign in your own handwriting. But in these days of strain, he hopes you will have recourse to the typewriter, which he knows means considerable saving of time and trouble." When the King visited the British Industries Fair in 1926, he was enraged to learn that the typewriters used in the government offices were American. "It's scandalous," he cried. That, however, was more criticism of all things transatlantic than a commendation of the typewriter. Bigg sustained faith in pen and ink, added several hours to each day, a toil yet was not unwelcome to his correspondence. To relieve the strain on the Queen Victoria's failing eyesight, he had changed his handwriting to a bolder script and used ink as thick and black as pitch. Before submission to the Queen, each completed sheet was then dried on heated tray on his own invention. That fine, clear hand lasted him through life. His letters lacked Ponsonby's humor, but he was well read enough to quote Vivian Grey to a conservative statesman and Soapy Sponge to a sporting courtier. Slight of build and unassuming in manner, Bigg displayed courage from the moment he began to serve the Duke of Cornwall in 1901. He expressed disapproval of the King Edward's decision not to create the heir to the throne, Prince of Wales, until after the return of the Ophir. As much a slur on the overseas dominions he felt as on the Duke himself. Nor was Bigg deterred from tendering unpalatable advice when he thought his master was in need of it. He pleaded with him firmly, but in vain, to abandon York Cottage in favor of a more spacious country house where he could entertain and so broaden his social and political horizons. The Prince of Wales, as he must be now called, wrote to his private secretary on New Year's Day in 1902, "I feel that I can always rely on you to tell me the truth, however disagreeable, and that you're certainly in my confidence. To a person in my position, it is enormously helpful to me." In a letter written from Sandringham on Christmas Day in 1907, the prince paid an even more remarkable tribute to his mentor. "Fancy how quickly time flies. It is nearly 7 years already since you came to me. You have nothing to thank us for. It is all for the other day, and we have indeed much to thank you for. As for myself, during these 7 years, you have made life comparatively an easy one. But your kind help and assistance and entire devotion to work connected with me. What would have happened to me if you had not been there to prepare and to help me with your speeches? I can hardly write a letter of any importance without your assistance. I fear sometimes I have lost my temper with you and often have been rude, but I am sure you know me well enough by now to know that I did not mean it. I offer you my thanks from the bottom of my heart. I am a bad hand at saying what I feel, and I thank God that I have a friend like you, in whom I have the fullest confidence, and from whom I know on all occasions I shall get the best and soundest of advice whenever I seek it." The Prince of Wales ended his letter with a piece of family news. "My two eldest sons enjoyed their first day's shooting. The eldest got 12 rabbits, and the second got 3. Okay, and we start a new section. So I'm going to end this because it's 30 minutes so that we can break this chapter up. So I will see you in the next recording. And thank you for listening.